Hello, my name is Kirk Shippos, and I'm here to take you on a journey into the mystical world of the human. In the cold, blistering region of upstate New York, many animals remain in hibernation. Storing their energy and waiting patiently for the ice to thaw is crucial, at least for most animals in these extreme conditions. An exception to these strong-willed creatures is an animal unlike any other, the human. Humans are driven by mystical things, but one thing that remains constant for all creatures of Earth is procreation. The humans will disregard outside influence and sacrifice almost anything to follow their instincts. The dance a human must perform during courtship is complex and layered deep into the subconscious. Amazingly, each human performs their dance differently. However, this may not always secure the attention of their mate. It's March, and in Lansing, New York, the snow still hasn't thawed. A local brewery attracts the attention of two humans looking to begin courtship. As the human can partner with pretty much anything nowadays, this human male has chosen to try to impress a female. Unlike most animals in nature, the male isn't the only one that must perform a dance for attention. However, it's believed by some that the dance of the male will ultimately decide whether the female is interested, and if success, they will journey out into the world for a possible lifetime together. As the male and female enter the brewery, we notice as they walk in that their spatial distance is spread out. It has been heard that a female may devour the male within seconds of meeting him if boundaries aren't respected. Luckily for this male, this interaction has started out extremely promising for him. As we notice the two looking around and investigating, we can tell that this location is new to both individuals. This may help or hurt the blossoming courtship. A new place with new conversations may be overwhelming as opposed to a place where there is more comfort in their own surroundings. Both male and female must remain confident as not to alarm the other and signal that they are both still ready to keep moving forward. The male uses a technique that is common at this early stage. He insists on providing financial assets which secure mind-altering refreshments that some humans will use to aid in the fluency of their interaction. They call it beer, and once ingested often negates some of the overwhelming insecurities that humans tend to focus on during conversations. It is not exact, nor does it work immediately. The next 10 minutes of the conversation, however, will be the most crucial for the success of their relationship going further. The two sit down at a table next to each other. The table is square, so instead of sitting across from one another, they become closer. Based on kinesics, their spatial distance has taken their first steps inwards. They are showing signs of interest as they are both in each other's personal zones. Both of the humans start to look around and observe the decor and setting. They use this to find a common visual interest, something to superficially spark a conversation. At this point, they both start to casually sip from the glasses, and they appear nervous to us. The female appears to initiate the conversation, and as a result, her face starts to turn red. This may indicate a possible nervousness or embarrassment she's feeling. The male instantly engages the conversation as he looks the female in her eyes as she's speaking. She is confident when she talks. She talks with her hands and smiles with her eyes. As soon as the female begins to speak, the male, for some reason, begins to cover his mouth and make many adjustments with his hair and face. His eye contact remains the same, however. He keeps his eyes narrow and doesn't smile bilaterally. The male engages the conversation very briefly and then pulls his phone out of his pocket, sets it face up on the table, then begins to look at it. The male is taking a huge risk by not showing the female that he's listening. He may only be hearing. At this point, the female would immediately sever the male's head from his body, but in our amazement, she refrains from this. The dark and cold winter in upstate New York has been very trying for these humans, but this female is persistent to find a mate. As the male continues to be engaged by his phone, the female continues to attempt to engage the conversation. When the male comes back to interact with the female, he finds himself unsure of what to do with his hands. His first response after touching his face nervously and hiding his words was to start rubbing his hands on his thighs. Humans are unique in that they perspire from their hands under stressful situations. This male's body language looks as if the female was torturing him. When the male lifts his head, he can give enough facial expressions to show that he's excited to be there, but it's not in congruence with his other body language. The female is continuing to be the protagonist in this interaction. She can attract the male's attention for just a moment before it's soon lost into the bright lights of his phone. It's like waves crashing on the rocks of his interpersonal intelligence. This male is disregarding the information in front of him and continues to self-sabotage himself by misrepresentation. He struggles not to use his phone as a crutch in between the gaps of their interaction. This appears to be wearing on the female's patience. This female is assumed to have great empathy as she doesn't lose sight of her goal despite the insubordinate body language of the male. She could give up now and feast on the remains, or she could try to adapt inadvertently and mirror the male. Now that the male and female are occupied on their phone, the conversation has slowed to an alarming rate. Still like waves, the conversation is happening a few sentences at a time, not allowing for any real communication to happen. The female is constantly looking up as her head is down to see if the male has resurfaced. She has resorted and entrained to his displacement activity almost subconsciously. She may do this out of boredom, or she is hoping to send a signal to the male that it's time for him to give her some attention. Unfortunately, the signal wasn't received, and her actions make the male look a little more comfortable with his phone. However, instead of sitting with his arms crossed now, or sitting on his hands, he is holding his phone off the table, which may come off of even less engaging to his potential mate. As the waves of intermittent insecurities crash upon the couple's conversation, it continues to bring them both to a phone-filled void. The male risks losing his opportunity due to an external distraction, while the female remains tentatively more engaged. While the male talks, she plays with her earring and maintains eye contact longer than he does. This leakage that the male is letting out doesn't show his counterpart that he's serious. The female's arms never cross, and her hands speak in congruence with what her face is promoting. She sips her beverage with uncomfortable ease, while the male gulps down his as if to quickly gain access to the magic of the elixir. A distraction has provided a little space for the male. While the female answers a phone call, the male has time to assess his situation. He remains on his phone for a minute, but then willingly turns his phone upside down on the table away from himself, almost as if to say he's ready to communicate, or maybe he has identified a threat. Until now, the male had no competition. He was in control, but he wasn't using his emotional intelligence to assess the female's signals of boredom. Notice how he leaves his phone on the table still. This could be considered a lifeline if the wave comes crashing back. As the female ends her conversation, the male's adrenaline mixed with the subtle glow of the tonic kicks in, and he has a choice either to run or to fight for the female's attention. This male has chosen to fight. He uses his body language to show some interest in her just-had conversation. This allows the female to open up even more while she introduces her phone to him. The male uses this moment to lean into the female. With his elbows on the table, spread out with open hands, this is the first time that he has shown any sort of interest physically. The male manages to extend his space beyond personal and intimate zones so he can create contact with the female's arm against his. This is the first contact. It is vital to the existence of this species. The touch that the male has introduced has been well received by the female as she gravitates towards him with her body language. Upon contact, the facial expressions of both the humans change dramatically. There is a nervousness of acceptation, but the humor behind the context of the photo was able to mask the anxiety. Once both parties came in contact, confidence levels in the male rose, which in turn allowed the female to retract her talons, and real communication without distraction began to develop. Shortly after the two started making progress, an audible distraction of music and singing filled the air, thus limiting the potential of verbal communication. The male and female departed with the same spatial distance as when they arrived. It was not a good sign for the male, for he may have floundered his opportunity to show interest and respect for the female in this very valuable first impression. If only the male had engaged appropriately, without distraction and with more confidence, this meeting may have been more of a success. This rule goes for all humans, including myself. It is unknown how these creatures communicate with their words. However, the information from the body language leads us to assume that this female did not enjoy herself to any extreme, and most likely ate the male before returning to her humble abode.